The air in the courtroom was heavy. Wooden benches creaked as people shifted uncomfortably, waiting for the next case. Parents sat nervously with their children, lawyers shuffled papers, and the court clerk tapped away on a computer. Then, with a sharp crack of the gavel, the room went silent. 17-year-old Jamal Carter stood at the defense table, his hands clasped in front of him. His mother, Angela, sat in the second row, clutching her purse so tightly that her knuckles turned white. The judge, a gray-haired man with decades of authority behind him, leaned forward. His eyes narrowed at Jamal, as if he had already made up his mind. Then, with a voice that boomed across the courtroom, he lashed out. "You think this courtroom is a joke? You think you can waste my time? I see kids like you every single day. Trouble, that's all you'll ever be. You'll never amount to anything if this is the path you're choosing." The words echoed through the chamber like thunder. The crowd stirred. Some gasped quietly. Others shook their heads, whispering under their breath. Jamal's shoulders stiffened. His eyes fell to the floor. It felt like the world was closing in, like he had already been sentenced before he even spoke. He could feel every pair of eyes on him, the disapproval, the doubt, the judgment. His mother's lips trembled as she fought back tears. She wanted to stand up, to defend her son, but all she could do was sit frozen, praying silently. But something unexpected was about to happen, because Jamal wasn't just another teenager standing trial. He wasn't the stereotype the judge saw. He was something else, something more. And within minutes, he would change the entire mood of that courtroom, with nothing but his words.
To understand what happened that day, you need to know who Jamal really was. Jamal grew up in Atlanta, Georgia, in a modest two-bedroom apartment. His mother, Angela, had raised him and his little sister on her own after their father left when Jamal was just 6 years old. She worked long hours as a nurse, often double shifts, just to keep the lights on and food in the fridge. Life wasn't easy. The neighborhood was rough. Police cars were a common sight, and many young boys Jamal grew up with eventually drifted into trouble, skipping school, hanging around the wrong crowds, or getting caught in petty crimes. But Jamal was different. He was quiet, focused, and thoughtful. Teachers noticed early that he had a gift. While other kids rushed through assignments, Jamal stayed behind, asking questions, trying to understand more. His favorite subject was history, and he had a particular fascination with the civil rights movement. One of his teachers once said, "Jamal didn't just want to memorize facts. He wanted to know the why behind them. He wanted to know how people fought for their rights and why justice mattered." By middle school, Jamal had joined the debate team. There, he discovered his voice. He wasn't the loudest kid, but when he spoke, people listened. He had a calm way of explaining things that made even the most complicated arguments sound simple. His debate coach once told him he had the makings of a lawyer. That idea stuck with Jamal. He started spending hours in the school library reading about famous court cases. He memorized stories of young people who stood up against injustice and made a difference. Still, despite his discipline, Jamal was not immune to the realities of his environment. Being a young black teenager in Atlanta meant he was constantly under watchful eyes, sometimes suspicious ones. He had been stopped before by officers while simply walking home, asked questions that felt less like concern and more like accusations. His mother always reminded him, "Keep your head down, Jamal. Be respectful. Don't give them a reason." He listened because he knew her warnings came from love and experience. But inside, he often wondered why simply being himself, walking home in his hoodie, backpack slung over his shoulder, was enough to make people assume the worst. This constant tension set the stage for what happened on the day he was arrested.
It was a Friday afternoon, late spring. School had just let out, and Jamal was walking home with two friends. They joked about basketball, teased each other about homework, and made plans for the weekend. But their laughter was cut short when two police cars pulled up beside them, lights flashing. "Hands where we could see them," an officer barked. Jamal froze. His heart raced as he slowly lifted his hands.
Confusion spread across his face. His friends did the same, their smiles gone, replaced with fear. The officer's tone was sharp as he explained, "A store was hit tonight. The suspects were teenagers in hoodies. You boys match the description." Jamal's voice shook as he replied, "Sir, we just left school. We haven't done anything." But the officer wasn't listening. They were patted down, backpacks searched. Jamal's debate team folder fell to the ground, papers scattering across the sidewalk. He reached for them instinctively, but an officer shouted, "Don't move." People gathered on the street, watching. Jamal felt his face burn with embarrassment. He wanted to scream that he was innocent, that he was just walking home. But the officers had already decided. Within minutes, he was handcuffed and placed in the back of the squad car. His friends were let go after questioning, but Jamal wasn't so lucky. At the station, he was booked, fingerprinted, and told he'd need to appear before a judge. He tried to explain again and again that he was innocent, but his words fell on deaf ears. When Angela arrived, still in her nurse's scrubs, her eyes filled with tears. She pressed her hand against the glass in the holding room, whispering to her son, "I know you didn't do this, baby. Just tell the truth. God knows the truth." Jamal nodded, but inside, he felt something heavy pressing down on him. It wasn't just about proving he didn't vandalize a store. It was about proving he wasn't who the world already thought he was. That weight followed him into the courtroom, and it was in that courtroom that everything would change. The courthouse that morning was packed. It was juvenile court day, and the room was filled with restless teenagers, anxious parents, and lawyers shuffling from one case to the next. Angela sat quietly on the wooden bench, her purse in her lap, her eyes fixed on her son. Jamal sat at the front, shoulders straight, but hands fidgeting slightly. He had never been in a courtroom before. The clerk called his name, and Jamal stepped forward. His sneakers squeaked against the polished floor. He cleared his throat softly, preparing to explain himself. But before he could get a single word out, the judge slammed his gavel. The sound cracked through the air, silencing even the whispers in the back rows. The judge leaned forward, his face hard, his tone dripping with irritation. His voice booming across the courtroom. "You think this is a game, young man? You think I have time for excuses? Every week I see boys like you in here. Same stories, same excuses. And do you know where they end up? In prison, or worse, and you're headed down the same path." The words cut like a blade. Angela's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to stand, to defend her son, but her voice froze. She pressed her hands together in prayer, whispering silently, "Lord, please." The courtroom murmured. Some spectators glanced at Jamal with pity. Others just shook their heads, as though the judge's words confirmed what they already believed. Jamal's chest tightened. Shame pressed against him, hot and heavy. He could feel the judgment in the room like 1,000 eyes on his back. He thought of his little sister at home, the one who looked up to him. He thought of the nights he stayed up late reading case law, imagining himself as a lawyer fighting for truth. And then something inside him shifted. He remembered his debate coach's words, "Don't shrink. Don't let anyone define you. Speak truth and let it stand." For the first time in his life, Jamal realized he had to stand up, not just for himself, but for everyone who had been dismissed, doubted, or silenced before they even had a chance to speak. When the judge paused, Jamal raised his head.
Jamal lifted his head, his voice soft but steady. "Your Honor, may I speak?" The judge blinked, caught off guard by the request. He leaned back in his chair, a smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth as though expecting the boy to stumble. "Go ahead," he said. "Let's hear it." Angela's heart pounded in her chest. She gripped the edge of the bench, terrified her son's boldness would make things worse.
But Jamal straightened his shoulders. When he spoke, it wasn't with anger, it was with calm conviction. "With respect, sir, I didn't vandalize anything. I was walking home from school when the police stopped me. I showed them my debate team folder. I told them I had just left campus. They didn't listen. They said I fit the description. But I wasn't there. I didn't do it." The courtroom shifted. People leaned forward, curiosity in their eyes. Jamal paused, then drew in a deep breath. His voice grew stronger. "I've spent a lot of time reading, Your Honor. I know that in this country, people are innocent until proven guilty. I know that being young or wearing a hoodie doesn't make me a criminal. I know the law is supposed to protect me too, and right now, all I ask is that you see me for who I am, not who you think I am." Silence fell over the room. Even the clerk stopped typing. The boy who had been written off as trouble now stood tall, his words cutting through the heavy air. A spectator leaned toward another, whispering under their breath, "That kid? He's not like the others." But Jamal wasn't finished. "Your Honor, I want to be a lawyer one day. I study cases. I read about people who stood up for what was right, even when it was hard. I believe in justice. That's why I'm asking you to look at me, not the stereotype you think I am." Angela's tears finally spilled, but they weren't from fear anymore. They were from pride. Her son wasn't shrinking, he was rising. The judge stared at Jamal, his expression unreadable. For a long moment, the courtroom seemed frozen in time. Then, slowly, he adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. His voice, now softer, carried across the silence. "You've done your homework, haven't you?" Jamal nodded quietly. The judge leaned back, no longer glaring but studying. The sharp edge in his cone had dulled. "You're right. The law says you are innocent until proven guilty. And from what I see, the police brought you here without enough evidence. The case against you is dismissed." The gavel came down, not as thunder, but as release. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Angela covered her mouth with both hands, sobbing openly now. She rushed forward as Jamal stepped back, wrapping her arms tightly around him. Spectators whispered in awe. A teenager had just defended himself in court and won. The judge looked at Jamal once more, his voice lower now, almost reflective. "Young man, you may have a future in this courtroom, just not on that side of the bench." The courtroom broke into soft laughter, but beneath it was something deeper, a truth no one could ignore. Jamal Carter had turned a moment of humiliation into one of triumph, and the story was only beginning. Word traveled fast. By that evening, the story of Jamal Carter had spread far beyond the courthouse walls. Local reporters who had been covering another case rushed to file articles. Headlines appeared online within hours. Teen defends himself in court and wins. Judge silenced by young man's words. At first, Angela wanted none of it. She didn't care about headlines or applause. She just wanted her son home, safe, sitting at the kitchen table with the plate of spaghetti she had promised him the night before. But the world wasn't about to let Jamal's story fade. That Sunday at church, the pastor called Jamal to the front. The entire congregation rose to their feet, clapping and cheering. Angela wiped her eyes as her son stood shyly beside the pulpit, overwhelmed by the sound of so many voices lifting him up. The pastor's voice rang out, proud and firm. This young man didn't just defend himself, he defended every young person who's ever been told they don't matter. We thank God for his courage. In the pews, parents leaned toward their children and whispered, "See, that's how you stand tall." At school, the shift was immediate. Kids who had barely noticed Jamal before now wanted to sit with him at lunch. Teachers congratulated him in the hallways, saying they had never seen a student display such composure under pressure. Even the principal pulled him aside, placing a hand on his shoulder and telling him, "You made us all proud." But not everyone was celebrating. Some critics insisted the judge had gone easy on Jamal because of public attention. Others argued that one powerful speech didn't erase the struggles young men like him still faced every single day. On talk radio, callers debated whether Jamal was a hero or just lucky. Through it all, Jamal kept quiet. He still had homework to finish, chores waiting at home, and debate team practice on Thursdays. Fame, local or otherwise, didn't change the fact that he was still a teenager, still learning, still finding his way. But in living rooms and barbershops across the city, his name was on people's lips. And in those conversations, something was shifting. A story that had begun with humiliation was turning into something far greater, a spark of hope. Within a week, Jamal's story had reached national news. A morning show aired the courtroom footage, replaying the moment when the judge's anger gave way to silence, and then to respect. Clips of Jamal's speech spread like wildfire online. Millions watched him declare, "I know that in this country, people are innocent until proven guilty." The comments poured in. "This young man just schooled the judge. Proud of him. More kids need his courage. Reminds me of Thurgood Marshall. Brilliant." Angela's phone buzzed nonstop. Reporters wanted interviews. Colleges sent letters. Civil rights groups reached out, offering mentorship and opportunities. One evening, Jamal and his mother sat side by side on the couch, watching their faces appear on the television screen. Angela shook her head in disbelief, whispering, "Lord have mercy. Jamal, you're on CNN." Jamal shrugged, his cheeks flushing with embarrassment. "I didn't do anything special, Mom. I just told the truth." But deep down, he knew it was more than that. His words had given people hope. They had shown that even in the face of authority, a teenager armed only with honesty and courage could still be heard. Even the judge himself was forced to reflect. In an interview with a local paper, he admitted that Jamal's speech had struck a chord. "I may have been too quick to judge that young man. His response reminded me why we sit in these chairs, to listen, not just to lecture." It was rare for a judge to show humility, but Jamal had managed to move even him. As weeks turned into months, Jamal's life began to change in ways he never imagined. His debate coach nominated him for a Youth Leadership Award. Invitations poured in from community groups and schools. People wanted to hear from the boy who had stood up in court and spoken truth to power. Parents brought their children just to watch him speak, hoping his courage might inspire their own. At first, Jamal was nervous. His voice shook, his palms sweated. But with each speech, he grew steadier. With each audience, his confidence deepened. He began to realize that his story wasn't just his anymore. It belonged to every kid who had ever felt unseen, unheard, or unfairly judged. One evening, after finishing a talk at a local community center, an older man approached him. His voice was raspy, his eyes tired, but his words carried the weight of lived experience. "When I was your age," the man said, "I didn't have the courage to speak. I let the system label me, and I spent years in prison for something I didn't do. Don't ever stop talking, son. You've got a gift." Jamal never forgot those words. Back at home, life hadn't suddenly become easy. Angela still worked long shifts to keep the lights on, bills still stacked up on the counter, and Jamal still faced the quiet challenges that came with growing up in a world quick to judge young black boys. But now, he carried something stronger than fear. He carried purpose. He began keeping a journal, recording every event, every speech, every lesson he learned.
And with each entry, the dream that had started as a whisper grew louder. The dream of becoming a lawyer. It no longer felt distant, it burned brighter than ever.
Years later, people still talked about that moment in the courtroom. Teachers played the clip in classrooms as a lesson in courage under pressure. Community groups invited Jamal, older now, more polished, to mentor the next generation. His story had become more than a headline. It had become a blueprint. Angela sometimes sat quietly in the back of the room, smiling as she watched her son speak. She remembered that night in court, the shame that gripped her when the judge's words came crashing down, and the pride that swelled when Jamal stood tall and spoke back with dignity. What began as a nightmare, a wrongful accusation, a humiliating scolding, had transformed into something no one could have predicted, a movement of hope. The story of Jamal Carter was never just about a boy who defended himself. It was about resilience, about refusing to let others define you, about the quiet power of truth spoken in the face of anger. In interviews, Jamal often reflected on that day. His words carried the same calm conviction that once silenced a courtroom. When the judge yelled at me, he said, I had a choice. I could shrink or I could speak. I chose to speak, not just for myself, but for every kid who's ever felt powerless. That day taught me that courage isn't loud. Sometimes it's just steady. Those words echoed far beyond the courthouse, beyond the city, beyond the headlines. And for countless young people watching, kids who felt overlooked, underestimated, or dismissed, Jamal's story lit a spark. A reminder that even in the most intimidating of rooms, their voice still mattered.
If stories like this move you, and you want more real-life cases that reveal the truth behind the headlines, make sure you hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell. That way, you'll never miss the next powerful story we bring to life.